Hey everyone, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, talk about the art and the science of the things that we put on our feet. Today, I am happy to be joined by Dr. Myers, and we are going to be doing one of our special episodes, which in its essence is literally just arguing over like our disagreements on shoes, but in a more scientific way is called Unpacking Our Disagreements. And it's where the two of us are going to go through one or potentially two shoes. We'll have to see how much time we have. And one or two shoes specifically that we very much disagree on. And the reason we actually want to bring this out is because we have these internal discussions, but we also want you to understand that we don't always experience the same thing in shoes. That's why we try to have as many reviewers as possible on every review, because different people are going to respond differently to the things that you put on your feet. And we want you to actually be not only aware of that, but use that to help you identify, I tend to identify with this reviewer. Maybe this is the one that my mechanics and my experiences might be similar to, because at the end of the day, we're not trying to sell you something. We want you to get better at identifying what's going to work for you. And that's part of this educational thing and why we continue to do this. But Andrea, is there anything else you would add to that about, like, other than the fact that we just like bickering and disagreeing, what else would you add as thoughts to help people understand why we're doing this?
Well, yes, of course, the opportunity for a good argument is, always a good one. But to echo your point, I think it's easy to like read shoe review sites or look at YouTube and think, okay, this reviewer didn't like this shoe, so I shouldn't even think about it. Or this reviewer loved this shoe. They got their marathon PR in it. I should buy that one. And people are different. Just because a shoe works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work well for everyone. We all have vastly different biomechanics. We've got different heights, weights, foot size, everything. So like Matt said, if you find yourself consistently agreeing with one of us on shoes, then that person's opinion might be a little more applicable to you than another person's. And Matt and I tend to disagree on shoes, not on all shoes, but on a lot, because he and I run very differently. And there's nothing wrong with running differently. There's no one right way to run. Everybody has a different movement pattern. I'm excited to dive into our most recent disagreement, and hopefully everyone can learn a few things.
Yep. And that's the whole reason is, again, we want you to be able to see this and how we navigate this and try to figure out maybe why is the more fun thing, which we can't always identify the exact answer. And we've actually, fortunately or unfortunately learned that, in that, some of the biomechanical models of running shoes and footwear don't always match the experiences that people have. Like, there's certain shoes where you'd think that it would work for me great and maybe not as great for Andrea, but then it's been the exact opposite. And that's where we talk about things like comfort. And the reason we, again, also do this is you kind of have to learn what shoes work for you and what don't. That's why, I was talking about this. I gave my running and footwear lecture yesterday, as of, the 27th of February, to my George Fox students where I teach. And I do this joke every single time, which I acknowledge. Normally it gets some laughs. This group of second years does not laugh at anything. So I bombed as usual, like I usually do with them, where I talk about the run cat scale. And I jokingly say, the run cat scale is where you put a cat on a treadmill, and then however it runs, if it deviates toward one shoe, that's the shoe you pick, which is a joke. And normally people laugh, but not everybody laughs. And, so I'll
What's up with your second years, Matt?
I know. I mean, also, what's up with my jokes? They clearly need to be better.
That's true.
That's the key. But the Run Cat scale stands for the Running Comfort Assessment Tool. It came out of some brilliant minds, Bishop et al. In Australia, where they really discovered, out of I feel it's like 100 and something different factors in footwear, they brought it down to 5 really important things. It's key because we realized that comfort has a greater predictor of shoe success than a lot of the biomechanical variables. And that's not like, you put your foot in it, it's super soft and it's plush or whatever. It's, does it feel just right for you? And we've talked about this before, and so I won't go into that, but understanding that different shoes are going to work for different people. And we might not always know why, but learning kind of the trends of what works for you is really key. And so Andrew and I have learned over the years, typically, although sometimes we get surprised, that there are certain things that work for us. And so that's what we're going to kind of share as we apply that to one or two shoes as usual, to again, help you understand, how do you do this for yourself, and how do you get better at learning what works best for you as an individual? Because guess what? Your running buddy is probably going to have something totally different. So,
and I would just make one more point that although, you and I both like to argue, and, it's nice to be right, in this situation, there is actually no right answer. Like, we're discussing why these shoes work or don't work for us, but it's not like, oh, well, I'm right about this shoe and you're wrong. It's just, this is how you and I, with different running styles, biomechanics, comfort filters, experience these shoes. And by discussing it in detail here, hopefully we can help you learn something about the shoes that work best for you.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that there is no right answer for the population. There's things that might work better for the individual, and that's why we are technically both going to be right in our own way. So that'll be fun. So the shoe, should we jump right in? Should we say what shoe this is? Yeah. I mean, they probably, if they've looked at the thumbnail, the episode name, they probably know what it is. Right. But it's going to be the Hoka Cielo X1 version 2. Did I say that right? Am I saying this correctly?
I think it's the Cielo X1 2.0.
2.0. Okay, so at least said Cielo correctly.
Yeah, and the original is just the Hoka Cielo X1.
Got it. Yeah, they just called it 2, but that's a different story.
Oh, well, I think that's because their spikes are called the X2, right?
Oh, that makes sense. Got it. All right. Well, that joke's not going to work now, so I'm going to abandon that. So anyway, this is new. How would you describe this? This is Hoka's kind of more premium race day shoe. It does technically now, is this within the legal stack height limits for World Athletics?
So what I read is that, well, one, Running Warehouse measures it as 46 millimeters at the heel and 39 in the forefoot. But what Hoka did with the 2.0 is whatever shoe they measure off of for World Athletics, which I think is a men's 9.
It's either 9 or 8.5. I think it could be 8.5.
Could be 8.5. Yeah. So they don't measure at the very back of the heel. They measure a little further forward. So wherever they measure on the heel, on the men's 8.5 measures 40 millimeters. But as the shoes get bigger, it actually measures more than that. And as they get smaller, it measures a little less. But basically, they tuned it so that the shoe that's getting measured is within the limits.
Got it. So technically within the limits, depending on who you ask, but it's still meant to be some kind of racing shoe, kind of more elite or faster level that's now no longer a training companion. The previous version was definitely above the legal limits, and it was really more of a workout kind of training companion. I thought it was a phenomenal shoe, honestly, for the recreational runner, where although this previous version was crazy bouncy and it was insane to run in, it was still very runnable from a easy run perspective. And I think it was more comfortable, where I thought it was a great option for recreational runners. There's also some unique factors that actually made it technically a stability shoe in some ways, or at least very guided, whereas this version is completely different. So if you thought knew the Cielo X1, this is not the same shoe at all. It is a racing shoe. It is meant to go fast. It doesn't go very well at slower speeds. It's really not how it's designed. It is meant to go at either fast workouts or fast race paces. Now, Indra, do you have the specs on this?
I do. And actually, I wanted to catch you there.
Great.
In our review of the 2.0, you wrote that the original was above limits. I was like, was it really? So I looked back, and actually the official stack height for the X1, like last year's shoe, for men it's 39.32, and for women it's 37.30. But, Running Warehouse hand measures shoes, and I looked at what they say it is, and they say it's also 46.39. So
interesting.
I think the original, this shoe was World Athletics legal as well, but from a pure measurement standpoint, the stack height is actually the same as the 2.0.
That makes sense. I remember what was crazy is that was not the lightest super shoe. It was definitely bouncy, but I forget who it was that used it for a mile road race and actually won. And I was like, who was that?
I think it was Chrissy Gear.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. And I was like, that would not have, at first, I was like, that's not the show I would have chosen. But then the more I used it, I'm like, I'm kind of not 100% surprised. It's crazy bouncy. So technically, hand measurement may not be the same stack height, or may not be the same different stack height, but it could feel more different.
Oh, absolutely. In my opinion, they should be called two different shoes because they're just so different in terms of the ride. Yep. But instead, we've got the 2.0. So for specs, because specs have changed, not the stack height or the drop, but the weight has changed a lot. So the original X1 was 9.3 ounces, 264 grams. That's a men's size 10. Hoka measures the men's size 10. It was 7.4 ounces, 210 grams for a women's size 8. And the 2.0 is over an ounce lighter in the men's version. So the men's 2.0 here, mine is very dirty because I basically ran in snow in it one day. Men's is 8.1 ounces, 230 grams. Again, that's a men's size 10. 6.8 ounces, 192 grams for women's size 8. So finally, we're seeing weights that are kind of what we expect to see with like true super racing shoes. The original, which I loved training in it, but I would never race in it because of how heavy it is. But 2.0 feels super light on foot. I would actually argue it feels lighter than its stated weight. So big props to Hoka for shaving that weight off of this new update.
Well, I mean, big props to them. How they did it works better for you than me, I think. So that's fair. Now, should we start with the ride or should we start with the fit first?
Well, I think we disagree the most on the ride. So let's give the people what they want and go straight to the controversy.
Got it. So they're still using, to my knowledge, the same P-bar or P-back-spaced foam. Still very soft, very bouncy. I would argue that this shoe, the midsole, to me, feels way more rockered and a little bit more bouncy in terms of how quick it responds compared to the original. The original was crazy once it broke in. It just had this really insane bounce. It would just propel you along. It was really good. It just wasn't that fast. It didn't it was really good to get into a rhythm. I ran a 1740 5K time, stroller time trial that I was not expecting to do in the original. I was like, oh, that was interesting. Which is not what I was expecting at the time. So it definitely could handle speed, but I just feel like from a light perspective, from how the foam seems to respond much quicker than the original version. And it is also very much more rocker. And you can just see this looking at the platform. 4-foot rocker is way more aggressive, way larger. The heel's got a much larger and more aggressive bevel. So from a ride and rolling perspective, for me, although it felt like it should be able to do 5K, 10K, the rolling ride made it feel a lot better for like marathon, half marathon type efforts. It's a very efficient suit. It's very light. And part of why that didn't work for me is because it just was not stable enough. Where if you look at how narrow the platform is, there's a medial cutout now, which I knew was not going to work for me, and it didn't. And the midfoot and heel are so narrow for a shoe that's so tall. I can handle this for short distances, but as it gets longer with something this soft and this narrow, 4-foot's great, right? But I'm not a 4-foot striker typically. I'm a rear foot striker. I just had a hard time. So I found it a very rolling, rockered ride that did have lots of bounce. It felt really light, and it felt good to turn over quickly, and it just didn't have the feel of like a 5K, 10K racer. It feels like it's a longer distance shoe that unfortunately with those kind of match just isn't going to work for someone like me that needs a little bit more stability or a stable rear foot, midfoot.
Well, I've got to say I completely disagree. Which is
awesome. That's the whole reason we're doing
this. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I do agree it's not for slow paces. Like when I took it for my first run, just doing a warm up, I'm like, wow, like I can feel this medial cutout. Not in a bad way, but just like this shoe wants to go faster than what I'm currently running. But I also agreed that the foam feels a lot more resilient. Like it just feels like it explodes when you load it. It's so fast and responsive. Whereas the original version, I think it felt more, the rocker was very apparent in the original version, but it didn't have that like explosive foam feeling that the 2.0 does. And what's interesting about that is the original version I could use for like mile pace workouts, no problem. But it was more of a rolling type shoe than like a really bouncy type shoe. And for me.
I know. I love that we're having the exact opposite experience with both shoes now. It's not just one, it's both.
Right.
Yeah.
So the 2.0, I mean, it just feels like it wants to go fast. And so I don't remember when we got the shoe, like a month ago. So I've been training for the 800 mile this winter. So like my longer workout days have been like all tempo runs or progression runs. So I've tested a lot at like half marathon pace, 10K pace, 5K pace. The most recent workout I did in it was like a 30-minute progression, 10 minutes at half marathon, 10 minutes at 10K, 10 minutes at 5K, which is a very cruel workout, but it went well. I had fun doing it. But I mean, as I got into the faster paces, it just felt like it responded accordingly. Like that final like 10-minute 5K section felt, hard, but amazing. Like I was like, this is an awesome shoe for running this fast. So for me, all right, so we've got this huge medial cutout here, but I land pretty much right here. So because I tend to land too far laterally on my midfoot, having this cutout just makes it so much easier for me to transition from where I land to my first MTP joint to push off. So it kind of feels like this shoe is really designed for like my stability issues, whereas it's oppositely not designed for your stability issues. Yeah. And when I was running slow, it just did kind of feel like there was like a hole here. Yeah. Like I would land and the shoe gave, but then as I started running faster in the shoe, it just felt like it shot me from initial contact to push off, which is one of the whole points of a super shoe. Yes.
Not to interrupt you, that's kind of why I've received a little bit of flack. I think we sometimes receive a little flack for this, but when we talk about shoes that are just not appropriate for slower paces and maybe in that case, not designed for recreational runners, this might be one of them where I think this shoe is so aggressive. Like if you're not, and somebody's going to ask, what pace should you be running in? I don't know if it's necessarily pace or like an effort, but yeah, I think I totally feel you where it feels like that midfoot, there's almost like it gives way. And I think either for me, it's being more unstable on the medial side, or in your case, if you're not running fast enough, you just don't transition through it quick enough. These shoes are designed at faster paces. They're not designed at slower jogging efforts because that's not what they're meant for. They're meant for faster efforts, for improving your economy, for improving your race performance. So that it's interesting to hear that you're also feeling like the midfoot kind of gives way, but I also understand why they did that because it's a great way to save weight. Somebody asked on YouTube,
that's like a huge cutout.
Yeah. They're like, why did they cut this out? I'm like, honestly, they're just trying to find every way they can to cut weight, and different cutouts are going to have different benefits and consequences.
Right. And a lot of people did complain, or reviewers mentioned, or runners mentioned how the lateral cutout in the original version caused the opposite problem. Like if you had lateral ankle stability issues, that you were going to end up like rolling your ankle, especially if you were running on like a crowned road. Now, I never really had that problem, which is interesting because I definitely have lateral stability issues, but I think it's probably because the placement of this lateral cutout is further back compared to the placement of the medial cutout. So like I don't even land close enough to the lateral cutout for I think it to really, like if I was a heel striker, I think it would be more of an issue, but for me, this just literally never bothered me. And I've got over 100 miles on these shoes. So,
but whereas for me, it was like, this is amazing. Like, I feel like I borderline have like almost a medial wedge or like medial stability, and that shoe did great. My only challenge is, as usual for me, I just ripped the outsole off. Sadly.
Yes.
So those, when you have something I can catch and pull off, it's going to get caught and pulling off. So
right.
I didn't quite get 100 miles on sadly on my pair, but
yeah. And both of these shoes have, this rubber patch and then an open patch, and that's right where you rip it off. Yeah. Right. That's where it came off on both shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I see that, I'm like, oh, this is not going to last long. Oh, I like this shoe. It's going to get murdered. Oh, it's so sad. But back to version 2.0, I'm really curious because what I want to talk to you, like what I experienced with the ride is I feel like I couldn't turn over as like into that like 5K below kind of pace because I found the shoe to be too rocker, which I've noticed when I have a very large rocker, it's really hard for me to push off. Like I use a lot of calf to drive forward as I get faster. And I feel like the rocker kind of takes away that mechanism for me. It sounds like, and that's kind of been my consistent feel. That sounds like that wasn't an issue for you.
That is correct. And sometimes I also have issues with forefoot rockers that are too early, but not on this one. A couple of the workouts I used 2.0 on, did my tempo run, and then I would have like 4x200, like faster than 800 pace. And I used this shoe for it. It felt awesome. Like I had no problems in it. I didn't even have problems doing that on slushy roads one day. Like the shoe was great for everything I threw at it. So I think the reason why it did not bother me as much, one, there's not like a huge amount of toe spring in the shoe. I think if it was a lot of toe spring combined with the early forefoot rocker, that would have just locked up my forefoot too much and I would have felt like I didn't have anything to push off of. I guess it just lines up well with my foot. It's just not too early. Like a good example of a shoe with too early of a forefoot rocker for me is the Magic Speed line, A6 Magic Speed. Yeah. Like that shoe, I just feel like my foot is like, my forefoot's in a cast and I can't use my calf muscles at all. But I definitely did not.
Are we actually somewhat agreeing on a shoe? That's a miracle.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Yeah. Sorry, A6. I didn't like the new The older Magic Speeds were phenomenal. Like I think it was version 3 was phenomenal. Version 4 just felt really stiff. And for those that don't know, we talk about this a lot of times when it comes to the stiffness of a shoe, which a plate can contribute to, whether a shoe is going to work for you actually depends on whether the lineup and the curve of the plate lines up with the axes of your first metatarsophalangeal joint, i.e. your typically your big toe joint. Now, the only way to actually like measure this, if you need like X-ray or fMRI or like something like some kind of imaging machine to look at this with your foot in there. And since most of us don't have access to that, honestly, you just put it on, go, does this feel good or not? Do you feel like does it feel not too stiff, not too flexible? Does it feel just right? That's how you know. And so it sounds like we have a similar experience on the Magic Speed, whereas I think I may be hitting this either a little bit too late or just not lining up the right way, but it seems to be lining up very, very well with you.
It definitely does. And I'm probably a good point to make is I'm really between sizes. Like there are a lot of shoes that I go up a half size in, but these Hokas have always fit me true to size in 9.5. So that may be part of it, just the way that Hoka has designed the shoe. And one thing that I like about both the original and the 2.0 is the width of the toe box. It lines up with like where my MTPs are. I don't get any irritation there. And that's often why I need to go up a half size in some super shoes, particularly the Endorphin line. So it may just be that being able to wear my proper length size also allows the forefoot rocker to line up with my MTPs correctly.
Should we talk about fit?
Yes, let's move on to that.
So I actually felt like this shoe fits slightly short, and I almost wondered. So I didn't realize this until recently, but I'm actually between a 10 and 10.5. And so I keep asking for 10s, not knowing what's going to happen, which sometimes has resulted in me losing toenails or bruising my toes. This is one of them that I, for the first time in a while, actually felt like this is a fairly snug fit. It's more of that. For those that kind of were used to some of the older racing shoes, pre-Super Shoe, this has more of a racing style fit for me. It's more snug, not a lot of room in the forefoot, and I would say it almost feels slightly short. Like if I could, I don't know if I would take this for a marathon because I think it's still pressing into my foot a little bit, where if I wanted to do that, I might consider a half size up. It sounds like that was a very different experience for you.
Definitely. And, you know, the funny thing is, like, most Hokas don't work for me because of the sidewalls. They kill my big toe. But both Cielo X1s have been just fine. So, yes, comparing 1 versus 2, clearly you can see that the 2.0 is narrower in the forefoot. You can see that it's lower volume in the toe box. And I could feel that. I mean, certainly it doesn't fit the same as the original, but I didn't find it uncomfortable. I would agree it fits like a racing shoe. Whereas this, I mean, it was just super comfortable, but it didn't necessarily feel like a racing shoe just because of how much volume was in here. But I didn't find the fit at all uncomfortable. I didn't notice any pressure on the side of my big toe like I normally do in like the Mach series or the Rincon. I didn't have any black toenails, no pain on my toe, anything. Like it was super comfortable. I would say Well, actually, it's pretty easy to lock down. You can see I had to lock down the laces pretty tight. They're pretty snugged up there, but this was an easy shoe to just put on and go.
Yeah, I would definitely agree in terms of the fit, where like I actually didn't have to lock the laces down at all. I think I did have to do that a little bit in the last one because, again, for those people with maybe a little bit wider feet or higher volume, the version 1 actually would work fairly well. I loved how much room I could like spread my toes out a little bit. It's not an ultra shoe, but there was plenty of room, whereas this is quite the opposite, where not in like the security is still phenomenal. It's like super lightweight material, which I think was a good transition. Not that I disliked the last version, but it was more comfortable than it was performance, and they could have dropped a lot of weight, which they certainly did in version 2. It's just that it also got a little bit more snug, and I didn't have to lock it down, but that's because it was already felt kind of locked down anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, super. I will appreciate it's got much lighter, which makes a lot more sense. I don't always understand what certain companies will use a fairly thick upper on a racing flat. I'm like,
right.
Why? Like, no judgment. I don't understand the point. Like, I'm not a materials science expert, so people can call me out on this on YouTube or wherever. But I think in today's world, we have enough synthetic materials where you can create a pretty secure fit that's actually fairly durable, that's still super lightweight. So yeah, version 2 makes total sense. I would caution certain people, like for me, that if this fits closer, the kind of this external overlay here, be a little cautious because that did cause some pressure issues. I didn't run far enough in the shoe because I literally couldn't. Like, I think my longest run was like 12 miles, but that's also a long run for me right now, where I did get some pressure, like didn't fully blister up, but got some pressure irritation from those. So those that are sensitive to that, like aggressive toe guard, it's flexible, but it still puts pressure. So I would say be a little cautious. Did you experience the same thing, or was you totally fine?
I was totally fine. My longest run was like 9 or 10 miles in it because that's the furthest I run these days.
Got it. Yeah.
Big difference from past years.
Yeah. That makes me feel better because usually it's like, I'll hit like 13 or 14 and Andrew's like, oh, yeah, another like casual 20 miler running like 6 flat.
I did 20s in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh man. But,
I will say, I know we're not like doing a comparison episode, but probably the best update between the two, the laces.
Oh, yeah.
These laces sucked. Sorry, Hoka, but they did. They made it really hard to like actually tighten the shoe because they were so stiff. These are like normal laces. They tighten like normal laces. So that issue in the original version is no longer present.
I will say I surprisingly actually agree with you, whereas that tongue was pretty thin. Even though it was like weirdly thick, it was also thin at the same time. And those laces gave me a fairly good amount of lace bite. And for those who don't know, lace bite is that experience where you like the laces get tight and it really pisses off the tendons on the top of your foot. Although there's a lot of different structures that actually can get mad with this, like the sheaths and whatever. But yeah, it just like puts too much pressure on that area. And those laces definitely did that. I didn't have any issue in version 2 with that at all. It was much better set. I also didn't have to lock it down as much, so definitely didn't have that problem.
So should we move on to talking a little more about the stability? I mean, we've already talked about, but let's talk about it more.
Let's talk about it more. Because I mean, that's to me, from where my brain sits, is the biggest difference, where I'm like, I don't have a problem with that because the goal is not to make every shoe a stability shoe. And I hope people realize that, but just the original version worked very well. It was one of the few stable like shoes out there for those that do have any kind of stability issue, at least immediately. Because in the past, there were stability racing shoes. There is no stability super shoe. That does not exist. There's a couple stable neutral versions that might work for people. And the original Cielo X1 actually did for anybody that collapsed or needed a little bit more help with pronation. But this is now not the same shoe. So as we progress, those that want to get the previous one on sale, great. But the new one coming this way means we have technically one less shoe in that market, which those that don't have stability needs, I think it's going to be totally fine. Although it sounds like this actually created some stability for you in a way that you need. So I'd love to hear more about that. But for those with heel or midfoot stability needs, this is not going to work, unlike version 1.
Yep. So I agree. These are like two different shoes, and it's actually a really interesting study. And you've got same company, two totally different geometries, and just completely different rides. And of course, there's more of a difference than just where they put the midfoot, the cutout, but the cutout is a big driver of how the shoe runs. So of course, like from a stability perspective for me, the placement of the cutout made the biggest difference. But Hoka always does a good job with, you know, the sole flaring in their shoes. There's not a ton in the heel, and I can understand why that makes it less stable for you. But for me, the sole flaring is pretty balanced medially and laterally. And again, that just made the ride a little more centered, especially, you know, this gives. I'm landing here, helping me progress to my first MTP and push off. Just helped me maybe not go too quickly medially. But there's really no like true control methods. It's not going to help you go in one. Well, it's not going to help you if you have medial stability needs. That's for sure. How did you feel in terms of like heel striking in the shoe? Did it feel like it just collapsed here? Or did you feel like it was like that collapse happened a little bit further into your stance phase?
I will say it was another reason why running slower wasn't super hot. Where like when I pick up the pace, obviously my landing point moves farther forward, and depending on where I'm going. But when I was like running easy, or I'm getting fatigued and I'm kind of farther back on the heel, I am going to say this, and I can get quoted on this. This is the case where having that soft of a midsole foam and that large of a bevel, I feel like didn't work as well. Plus a narrow platform, where it was like, you know, bevels are great because they facilitate motion, but you have to be able to control it. If you add, for me, super soft heel on top of that, and then also a narrow platform, which didn't work, like I would just land and kind of wobble. If I was running faster, I could roll through it. Like when I started getting really quick, it felt like a better shoe because, and I can totally understand why this works great for you, because that forefoot, there is sole flare. You can see it, the small piece on the lateral side. So I totally get why that would keep you a little bit more centered. There is some lateral sole flare, which I was, or not sole flare, a lateral sidewall, which I was wondering if you'd noticed and if that bothered you at all. But the forefoot is actually pretty decent. It's not great. It's also not terrible though. But just the larger the bevel is, the more you have to be able to control it. And if you add a super soft foam and a narrow platform, it just was a little bit of a struggle. Could I do it? Yeah, but just there was a certain mile where I'm like, I'm starting to struggle and I'm getting fatigued, both in ankle and hip.
Yeah, and you know, talking about like your experience in the shoe, this shoe is so interesting to look at when it's sitting flat because like the heel really doesn't touch the ground.
No, it really doesn't.
And the angle of the bevel almost makes like the heel striking point right in front of the cutout.
Yeah.
And that would be incredibly unstable if that's where you naturally land.
Right.
So yeah, it's just not designed for people like you.
Yep, for stability. Yep. So I mean, it can work. I mean, and you could. I'm certainly, if I trained up. I mean, the outsole's going to be my biggest thing because I'm already at 30 miles starting to pull. Some people can see me picking at this. If I can get a little farther forward, that's good. I just found, again, the rocker for me is too large for me to feel like it's a faster shoe for me personally. But those people that do well with that is going to be great. Those people have very neutral mechanics that can just roll through. This shoe is designed like for you to stay really in the sagittal plane, front to back. If you have any side to side motion, this is probably not going to be the greatest shoe for you. But if you stay in the middle, this is going to be a great, very efficient, quick shoe, just not for someone like me that has a little side to side or frontal plane motion. Right. That's just how it goes. But I will say, like, I get what Hoka's doing. And, you know, I brought this shoe out too. And I was like talking about the Endorphin Elite 2, where this is also one where they actually did they widened certain areas out and they have a lateral cutout in the midfoot, which you would think would work for me, but it's just so soft. I've been struggling with this shoe as well. And so it's another thing where kind of, it's so responsive and so aggressive, it may not work for individuals like myself that just need it to be a little more stable, because the taller you get with midsoles, for a trainer, you do need to widen the sole out, because the taller you get, the more inherently unstable it's going to be. But when you're trying to cut weight and you're running faster, they're looking for the most efficient way to make that shoes light. And I can't judge, but yeah, that's just the trade-off of making them lighter.
I haven't gotten to test that shoe besides when we got to just briefly run in it when we visited Saucony. But I'm interested to see. I mean, I know it's so different from the original version, but I'm interested to just feel what that cutout is like.
Yeah. I guess we could say that now that we put the original, like the early version of the Endorphin Elite 2 on. We went and visited, and it was super cool. And I think I saw you and Dave be like, "This is cool," and I put it on. I'm like, I think I'm going to sprain my ankle. Like I was really scared, and I think I've almost got 50 miles. I'm forcing myself to run to them, but I was like, oh my gosh, I can't. This is the bounciest thing I've ever like softest thing I've ever run in, and it was like, oh. We're at an interesting turning point where I think shoes are becoming so soft and responsive that you've really got to to keep them light, you've really got to make sure you got stable mechanics. And some of us, like myself, might get left behind a little bit. Or what I think what is starting to happen is like the Vaporfly, which I think we've talked about, version 4 is actually not maximal stack. They actually dropped the stack height. And for someone like myself, that makes me really excited. Andrew and I are both really excited about the Streakfly 2 because we both like running shorter distance stuff right now. And to have something a little closer is going to be a little more inherently stable because it's closer to ground. So we might see two divergent categories, and we'll have to see how the public responds to them. What do you think about that?
I mean, I hope that that's what happens. Like, I think we talked about this in some episode, but we've tested so many shoes that have stack heights in the 40 or even 50 millimeter range. And it would be interesting to talk to someone who's like 20 versus someone who's our age, who we all ran in normal shoes before this like maximal craze, right? Like I really enjoy running in shoes that are lower to the ground that just make me feel like I'm running, and like the shoe isn't doing it for me. But if you've only ever run in, modern running shoes, do you feel the same? Like, what if you're... Yeah. But I do think, like, the pendulum has swung pretty far in one direction. Like, every shoe is being maximized. Like, Hyperion Max 2 got bigger. It's going to get bigger in version 3. Like, every single shoe, adding stack height, whatever. Some people like that, but not everybody does. And also, unfortunately or fortunately, the footwear industry always needs to put out something new every year. So after they've fed us, several years of all of these super tall shoes,
50 millimeter stack height. Yeah.
Yep. We're bringing back the low stack shoe, and will it be like in the, 10 to 20 millimeter range? Probably not. Yeah. But I hope that there will be like a true second category of super shoes that are like, the New Balance Pacer version 2, which I loved, except it completely shredded my heels. Like the bloodstain was actually pretty gross on the shoe. But those shoes, not everyone's a marathon runner. And as these marathon shoes are getting taller and softer and more tuned for the marathon distance, people who just race 5Ks, 10Ks, even half marathons who don't need that tall of a shoe or that heavy of a shoe, it would be nice to have shoes designed for the significantly faster running you're doing at those paces. And I mean, that's a real opportunity for shoe companies, and they want to make money, but it's also an exciting opportunity for runners to try something different.
Yeah, I would say that gets me equally excited. And I totally agree with you that I feel like the last year, especially, a lot of the super shoes just feel better at those longer distance paces, and trying to get them to turn over at 5K, 10K is a struggle. But then you go into the shoes meant for 5K, 10K, and they're not to be rude, they're not full super shoes. Like the Takumi Sen is a great shoe, for example, but just how it feels, how the rod placements, like it's not the same as the Adios Pro or a Vaporfly. The original Streakfly just wasn't the same. It was a great flexible shoe with a little bit of bouncy foam, but it wasn't a true super shoe by any means. In fact, I know a lot of people that like it better as a training shoe than a faster shoe, which is interesting. So I am excited. It looks like there's this second category, like you said, it's coming back, where it's maybe moderate stack height is maybe the better term, but it's still got all the super shoe features, and it's not nearly as kind of low as some of these other things are. There's still the plate, there's still the super foam, there's still the geometry, but it just seems to be a little bit more balanced. The hard part, though, is that a lot of the running, like especially the recreational and elite people, everybody's wanting taller because they've been fed this story that more is better. But and everybody seems to focus on the marathon, people doing 5K, 10Ks, that's not as popular. Like you and I love that because I want to be able to go faster. Like that's something that's innate to us, but everybody wants to focus on the marathon. So I'm curious to see if this new category sticks around, knowing it's not going to be as applicable to the marathon, half marathon anymore. And that's really where the money is. Like that's where you sell. That's why people want the softest, most cushioned kind of thing, at least in the United States. I think worldwide might be different, but maybe I'll have to go back to getting companies irritated because I found something they only sell in the Asian market and I ordered it. And they're like, please, Matt, stop reviewing this stuff because people ask for it. Yeah, I've been on really good behavior
about it.
Yeah, I've been on really good behavior, most because all the like really cool shoes died because everybody now even across the world wants super shoes. So maybe I'll have a return to that. We'll see.
What you were just saying about like everyone, the focus on marathon shoes and taller stack kind of makes me think along the lines of this shoe, the 2.0. I mean, this really is designed for, in my opinion, for faster running. Like this, for me, is a 5K, 10K shoe. And what are its attributes? It's very neutral. It's not for people with stability needs. It's super responsive. It's super rockered. So is this going to be what that like moderate stack height category ends up being, where there's shoes that are designed for faster running and maybe, that's the shoe that some marathoners use, just like M. Sisson uses the Pacer 2 for marathons. There's going to be plenty of Hoka athletes racing marathons in this shoe. Maybe the new Streak Fly, and I cannot wait to test it, is going to be that shoe for some people, where it's like a slightly lower stack Vaporfly, essentially. And we've got to keep in mind the original Vaporfly, the stack height was like 30 something, 30 or something, maybe even lower, right?
I think it was slightly lower. Somebody please correct us in the on YouTube or wherever you're listening. But yeah, it wasn't maximal, and I think for some it felt like that because back in the day there weren't a lot of shoes that had a heel stack height that high, and certainly not anything that was that soft or resilient. Like that was mind blowing. But you compare it to some of the stuff today, it's like, oh, that's like a moderate stack height shoe. Like I think the Takumi Sen, the newer, is like some of it's like the same thing. So to have it kind of come back, I think is actually good because it kind of brings us back to where we were, where a lot of the racing flats back in the day before super shoes, people couldn't take for a marathon. It was only the elites that really would take those for longer distances. And even the elites would go, nah, actually, instead of the like an Adios, I'm going to take a Boston for, and people ran really fast. And I think we might be going somewhat back to that, where most people are going to use for a marathon an Alpha Fly or your more like cushion type shoe. And then maybe more elite stuff, people that can run faster and handle a little less might use Vaporfly, or even some might be able to do a Streak Fly too. Although that shoe, I don't know if somebody could take that. I'm sure somebody can, but I would not take that for a marathon. That'd be really aggressive.
Yes.
It almost looks like it's kind of like how spikes were like the way the midsole is curved. It's like, is this technically a negative drop? Sure, I think it
does look like that.
I think it was reported it's a 4 millimeter drop shoe, but yeah, we'll have to see.
Actually, I feel like that gets into like foot angle in the shoe, and it was so fascinating talking to the Mizuno R&D people about this because they're really the only ones who like even publish that data or talk about it. Yeah, but I think that one of the factors that influences comfort and performance is your foot angle in the shoe, not just the drop. Right. And it would be super interesting to know what those numbers are for other brands of shoes, because that might be a data point that helps people pick their shoes more efficiently. Yeah.
So like what position is your foot in? Because, you know, everybody loves to talk about heel drop, but then when you load it, things obviously change. So heel drop is it's nice when you're standing. It's a totally different story when you actually load the shoe. So actually seeing foot position in the shoe might be another interesting thing to talk about if the public can actually understand what that means. So whether they can or not is a different story. But,
yeah. I mean, even taking like the X2, for example. So this is Running Warehouse measured it at 46.39, whatever. So there's another 46.39 shoe.
Supposedly 7 millimeter drop.
Yeah. your foot angle is not going to be the same in two shoes that have the same heel and forefoot drop, because it depends on the rocker geometry. It depends on the cradle. It depends like how the sidewells are shaped. So foot angle really is a metric that I think would be very useful to know. But I feel like I certainly have only heard Mizuno talk about it.
Right. I also felt like, by the way, the heel drop felt really low in the Cielo X1 2.0 to me. I felt like the original one was like, okay, this feels approximately like what a 7mm drop feels like. But I think the heel cutout and then how much the foam compressed with my heel strike made the shoe feel not uncomfortable. It was like, oh, this feels a lot lower drop than I was expecting, where sometimes I feel like I had to climb out of the heel. And then it rolled me forward really nice. But is that something you noticed at all, or no? Just felt...
Well, for me, like if I run in a shoe that has a stated like 8 to 10 mil drop, depending on how the heel bevel is designed, I might kind of feel like the heel is getting in the way. I definitely didn't feel that with this shoe. So for me, it feels like less than 7 simply because I didn't notice the heel at all. But, you know...
Well, there's like really no heel. There's no heel to get in the way anyway. So,
right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would agree. Like to me, it ran more like a 4 to 6mm drop shoe.
Yep. I 100% agree. Which is, I mean, what was it? I think the highest heel drop shoe in the Hoka lineup is actually the new Clifton, which comes in at 8. That's the highest. Yeah. And before that, I think the Cielo X1 was the highest, technically, said this highest static drop of any Hoka at 7mm. So that was interesting. But I would say for those that maybe look at that, go, oh no, like, no, it feels low. Yeah. It feels very Hoka-esque, where you're sitting into the midsole. The midsole is going to compress. This is not a higher drop shoe. So those, I think I would consider from an injury or like pathology standpoint that even though there's a massive rocker, this might not be a top choice for me. If somebody's like, oh, I have some Achilles problems, I want to be able to like have a rocker shoe, I wouldn't do that, because if you do land farther back, you're going to have to climb out of the shoe because it's so soft. And of course it's not stable. So some people have some Achilles issues with instability. This is not going to be a great option. I think, who do you think, I know we might disagree on this, but who do you think the shoe is going to work best for?
Like in terms of mechanics or in terms of race distance, or both?
Both, yeah.
All right. I mean, it's a neutral shoe. It worked great for me. I've sprained my ankles, probably 100 times. So if you have a tendency to roll your ankles laterally, or if you tend to land very far lateral, then the medial cutout of the 2.0 will help you not land so far lateral, and it will actually help you potentially progress to the medial aspect of your forefoot and help you push off better. Questionable if it's good for even like lateral heel strikers simply because of the bevel. Yeah. I mean, at least you've got material continuous here. Right. But I think the shoe is probably better for people who naturally land further forward. It's much wider here. It's more stable. As far as like race distance, I personally would use it like 5K, half marathon. I really can't say if I would use it for a marathon, since I haven't ran long enough or at marathon pace in it to be confident in saying either way. But I suspect maybe not, but I can't say because I don't have the actual data.
I would very much agree with you on this in terms of the people that have any, like, especially kind of farther forward, because when you see shoes that have this like extension on the lateral side of the forefoot, that's great. That actually does super well for people that go a little bit too far lateral, which is the opposite of what I do. So this is actually really good. So people that, again, like Andrew, that maybe go a little too far lateral here, this might be a really good shoe that kind of pivots you back to the middle. Lateral heel striker, that's, I can't promise you on that one. But I also agree that I think this perfect distance for this is like 10K to half marathon. Even if my mechanics are better, I don't think I would use this for a marathon because it just doesn't have that more stable enough base. And I think a lot like elite athlete, I think people that can run in anything, this could be an easy marathon shoe. But for most people, like the recreational runner and the sub-elite runner, I think this is going to be a 10K half marathon max shoe because of how aggressive it is, to be very honest with you. So I'd agree with that.
It kind of reminds me of like my thoughts on like the original Alpha Fly, which Like that shoe was so good for me.
Yeah.
But I would never use it for a marathon. And I tried it on several like 18 to 20 milers. It's too responsive. Like it felt like it was too much for a relatively slower pace and for that distance. But I've set literally every PR I have from 5K to half marathon in the original Alpha Fly, and would pay a lot of money if Nike brought it back.
They do occasionally do that. Yeah, we'll see. That's another shoe we'll have to talk about at some point. Because remember when I dropped the comparison review, because I was just trying to get that video out as soon as possible. I did the Alpha Fly 1 versus the Alpha Fly 3. I did that, and Andrew's like, no, I totally disagree. Like, what is wrong with you? And so I was like, we should have done a comparison with that too. So that'll have to be as the Alpha Fly 4 nears, potentially we'll have to see how that goes. Because you found the Alpha Fly 3 to be more of like, what kind of shoe for you? You haven't worn it that much, huh?
No, one, it didn't fit as well as the original Alpha Fly, but two, when they encapsulated the AirPods, they just didn't feel as responsive as the original Alpha Fly 1. And it didn't feel that fast to me. And it gave me black toenails, so I also didn't like that. But it just, even just the way that it performed, it was like, this is nothing like version 1, which is my absolute favorite. So
version 1 diehard. Whereas for me, it was like the version 1, because it was so low drop, I had to climb out of that heel over the pods. It didn't work as well. Whereas version 3 was like this insane, because I hit the heel so hard. It was just like this insanely bouncy thing that I actually didn't run in that much. Like I got my miles and then moved on because I couldn't control. It was so fast. It like scared me and it ruined other shoes. And then the other thing is, of course, I was just destroying the outsole very quickly. So I was like, oh. Somebody commented on YouTube going, Nike should pay Matt to be their durability tester for all their shoes. It's like, give me 30 miles. The outsole will be gone. I'll test that. Want the ultimate Matt, friction.
Here's another thing that you and I are similar in. Yeah. I actually ripped the outsole off of a pair of Alpha Fly 1s after only like 20 miles in them too.
What?
But this was like, I had bought them myself. It wasn't like they had sent them to me for review, and I bought them from Running Warehouse. So I sent them a picture of it, and Running Warehouse replaced them for me.
Oh, sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, but like the whole...
Shout out,
like this
that makes sense.
Whole piece ripped off. And I have no idea how that happened. Like maybe it was a defective pair, but and it was like 2 miles into a workout. And I was like, what's underneath my foot? And there was just like this, it was hanging there. And I still had a workout to do, so I ripped it off and finished the workout.
Yep,
so you don't actually need that. Yeah,
I've done that so many times. Where it's like having a flat tire where like the tire's really loose and you keep scuffing it. I'm like, this sucks. I know exactly what's happened. And I got a chunk hanging off. This happens all the time to me. I'm like, oh man.
It's a bummer.
It's a bummer. All right. So believe it or not, we actually had more in common as we discovered.
Look at
Andrea is actually part of the Shoe Destroyer Club, whether she wants to admit it or not. But
that's true.
We hope that some of this banter, as we are trying, and this is partly us trying to share our expertise of what we're experiencing, but also sharing the questions that we have as we're going through this, as we try to learn and going, there's new stuff coming out. How is this working for people? How is this working for us as individuals? So we really, really hope this helps you, because we do this for we do it because we're shoe geeks, but we also really talk about it and share because we want all of you to learn from this and get better and figure out what works best for you as an individual. Lots of data is showing that people are really, really unique and specific. So if it could help give a little data point for you to start learning, that's the whole point of this. So as always, you can find us on a bunch of different channels. The videos that we do here can be found in audio form on Spotify, iTunes. You can see the video come out on YouTube, which I always get this wrong. Do we release, this is on Wednesday or Sunday relice? It's just Wednesday release the video, right?
No.
Audio
on Wednesday, video on Sunday.
It's not like we've been doing this for several years. Bach, don't get mad at me.
He's
audio,
mad at you.
I know he has plenty of reasons to be mad at me. So audio will always come out on Wednesday and the video comes out on Sunday. You can find us also in many different areas. We also are on, obviously, the Doctors Running website. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those different areas. And of course on Strava, where we're trying to log all of our miles. We really appreciate you following along. And as always, hope this really helps you figure out what works best for you, because we are also trying to do the same thing.